Blog Talk Radio.
Well, I call this the Rust Belt report. We start out with Cleveland, and then we go into Pittsburgh right after this. But right now it's center stage. Move over the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Move over the Browns, the Cavaliers, and the Indians. This is the American Sports History Podcast hosted by my mentor, my brother and friend, Peter Ray. Yours truly, Mark Mancini, producing it. 347-205-9631. This show goes by quick, so if you blink an eye, it's over. You have to catch the archive on blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports. Podcast platforms, wherever you subscribe to, powered by Mancini Media. So, less of me, more of him as I lay the red carpet down, put the podium in its place, hand off the mic. First of all, Peter, how are you? Second of all, how can people get a hold of you? And third of all, another legend coming through the lounge tonight.
Hi, Mark. I'm doing well. I am on Facebook. My name is Peter Ray, REA. I have a YouTube channel, Peter J. Ray, REA. And you're exactly right. We have a returning guest tonight. It's a wonderful privilege. Our guest is a labor attorney. He was an outstanding baseball player as a young man. He's written 3 books, a concise guide to successful employment practices, the 10 Commandments of Baseball, and baseball's winning ways. It's an honor and a privilege to have on the show tonight Mr. JD Thorne.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, JD, would you like to tell us about your latest book, Baseball's Winning Ways?
Well, Baseball's Winning Ways was a very dear project for my publisher, Sporting Chance Press of Crystal Lake, Illinois. And his aim is publishing positive and promoting the good, really, with interesting, knowledgeable, inspirational books involving sports. You know, there's enough bad news today, and everybody, especially the kids, hear it all. Sometimes it's nice to stop listening to the violent crime statistics and all the rest of it, burning churches in Canada. I mean, it's awful sometimes, and it's nice to have a little positive sense, and that's what we try to bring some normalcy, really, in a harmonious note, to talking about baseball. If you have some good attentive scholarship and some good storytelling, you can have a lot of fun talking about baseball.
Now, I was looking at through your book, and you talked about a lot of players throughout the history of baseball, and I'm a historian, and I guess since it's the less well known, and I think if you tell a story, start at the beginning. So, would you like to talk about Harry Wright?
Well, sure. Harry Wright's an early manager and team manager, going back to the first professional days in Cincinnati. We're talking 1869. He put together the first professional team, and it was really a little controversial then. Baseball was supposed to be pure and amateur, and actually paying players. That was a little something new. But of course, who got the best players then? Harry Wright. So he put together what the Cincinnati Red Stockings, and they toured, challenging all takers, and they won 137 straight games before getting beat. It's hard to believe, but they had a lot of fun. They toured for a year and a half before they got beat.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's wonderful. The 1869 Cincinnati Red Stockings. It's wonderful to learn about that. And yeah, you're right. And apparently that they went undefeated in '69, and that became a big story. And apparently that sort of inspired the beginning of a pro league 2 years later.
Right. Well, it was only 1876 when the National League was formed. So, but I want to say with Harry Wright, one last thing is that once the team got beat, kind of the magic, the bubble was burst, and the team dissipated. But the next year, Harry Wright moves to Boston and starts the Boston Red Sox. So he stayed in the game quite a while.
I have a biography of him I've been reading, and so that's wonderful. The early days of baseball, which the 19th century I think has been neglected by MLB, and I think it's really good to shine a light on those guys, because it's I guess the attitude is like, oh, the game was changing, so we're kind of going to act, and it's a new century, we're kind of act like the baseball started in the 20th century, but when it didn't. So moving on, another guy here I picked out of your list of names. I remember as a kid, I guess it was Spalding baseball. So, so Spalding is a familiar name, especially. I don't know about today if there's much Spalding in the game in terms of sporting goods. But would you like to talk about Albert Spalding or Al Spalding?
Spalding was the pride of Rockford, Illinois. And he was started as a pitcher in the early days. And again, now we're back to 1870s. And he teamed up with Harry Wright because he was so good. And really earned a name. Then later on, he caused a ruckus when he left Harry Wright and the Red Stockings and went to Chicago. He saw an opportunity and went home, really. Rockford's not too far from Chicago, and started a team that later became the Chicago Cubs. And then he thought to himself, the money in this game isn't playing it, it's the equipment, the baseballs, the gloves, the bat. And so he got into the equipment side of things and then did a great job and ended up owning the Chicago Cubs and was a general manager of the Cubs all the way through his later years. I think he retired in about age 65 or 70, and he had a great. He was really something. So he started the A.G. Spalding Brothers that manufactured and distributed sporting goods. Now they still use Spalding basketballs; they're very prevalent today, and I think baseballs too, and gloves. So I got a kick out of one of his first things was publishing the rule book. So he got an official rule book. Spalding was the guy that published it. He was inducted in the Hall of Fame in 1939.
Spalding, Al Spalding. I'm thinking of another guy. I was thinking of Comiskey with the Black Sox in 1919. But moving on to Cy Young. Now, Cy Young, he was he's important here in Cleveland. Kind of forgotten since he was his glory years were in Cleveland were in the 1890s again, as I mentioned, kind of neglected. But and everyone knows Cy Young. So, but the guy because of the Cy Young Award, of course, but right. The man behind the award. Can you talk about Cy Young?
Well, he was big for those days. He was 6'2", which was in those days was a pretty stout fellow. He played from 1890 to 1911. So he's right at the beginning of the change of the modern baseball in 1903 when the American League and the National League decided to play a World Series against one another. And they were both major leagues by then. He was one of the early pitchers. He even worked through the change in the pitching distances. Between 1892 and 1893, the distance was increased from 55 feet to 60 feet 6 inches. It was 55 feet 6 inches, and it went to 60 feet 6 inches, which is what it is today. So that again, it was a move that the owners were doing to improve hitting averages, and it worked like a charm. All the averages went up, and it was a lot easier to hit. But guys like Cy Young went through all that. A lot of them, I think one of his best pitches was also a spitball. And some of those pitchers, they found that it was actually easier on their arm to throw a spitball, and they had better control over it too. And that kind of spitball became unfashionable, floppy, and felt to be unsafe maybe. But I think they banned it more because it was hard to hit. I have a funny story if I can go to it. It was told to me by Johnny Logan, who was the shortstop for the Milwaukee Braves in the 1950s. And I knew him later in Milwaukee. And a super guy, and one of his stories was He said, well, he played on the team with Lou Burdett. Now, Lou Burdett was a great pitcher, won 3 games in the 57 World Series. But when he was pitching, the big thing was he throwing a spitball or not? And he'd fake it, and almost the fear that he might be throwing it was just as almost effective as actually throwing it. The thing was, Johnny said to me once, he said, JD, people ask me all the time, did Lou Burdett throw a spitball? And he said, I can't say. Now, that's the player's credo. But I can tell you this story. And he said, imagine, if you will, about mid-1950s, the Braves are 54, 55. Jackie Robinson's playing for the Dodgers. We're playing at Ebbets Field. Roy Campanello's the catcher. And we're winning 3-2. Burdett's on the mound. I'm playing shortstop. There's a runner on second base, 2 outs in the last inning. And the job of a guy on second base is to score. And so what do? You got to make sure you score on a base hit because you're the tying run. So you cheat a little bit. You get as big a lead as you can. Well, Logan sees this. He says to himself, well, we can pick this guy off. What a great way to end the ballgame. The 3-2 pitch, instead of throwing to a good hitter like Campanella, we'll pick the guy off second base and end the game. They have the guy dead to right, so he flashes the pickoff sign to Lou Burdett. Lou Burdett sees the same thing as Johnny sees it and said, we can get this guy, and flashes the sign back to Logan. The pickoff is on. So it was a timing pickoff. You count 3, 2, 1. And on the 3, the shortstop fakes going to run behind the runner. And then on 2, he comes back to make the runner think that there's no pickoff on. Then on 1, he goes behind the runner at second base, and the pitcher is counting the same way, 3, 2, 1. So without even looking at second base, he turns and goes to second base. That's the play. So Logan leaves his position at shortstop. It's wide open. You got a great hitter like Campanella. And what does Burdett do? It's a 3-2 pitch. He throws home. The ball breaks about 18 inches. Campanella swings and misses. Strike 3. The game is over. Logan says, as we're running in to the dugout, I kind of hustle up and I get next to Lou and I say, hey, Burdett, what happened? And he said, Burdett looked at me and said, Johnny, that ball was so loaded up, I changed my mind because I felt if I threw it to you, you'd miss it.
the ball going to center.
Right. So I decided to throw home, and we struck him out anyway.
Well, that's a wonderful story.
I'm sorry to take up so much time. It's just so much a fun story.
No, that's wonderful. That's especially you heard it directly from the horse's mouth.
Right.
Another guy from your book caught my attention. Kind of a forgotten guy, but he, because of the Philadelphia A's don't exist anymore, and they've been gone for almost 70 years. And but this guy was 50 years part owner manager of the Philadelphia Athletics. Could you talk about Connie Mack, one of the most amazing people in baseball history?
Well, that's it. Connie Mack was a lawyer. He had a big. He started actually in Milwaukee. He played ball, and then he worked his way into management, and he managed the minor league team, and owned it in Milwaukee in like 1900. And that goes back to the start of the American League. Actually, I have a little sign that we just finished Irish Fest here. It's the world's largest Irish music festival outside of Ireland itself, and it might even be bigger than any of them there. The idea is that they have a sign up. They had a little section on baseball, Irish and baseball history, and they said 5 Irishmen walked into a bar in Milwaukee and came out with the American League. Connie Mack.
Okay.
But then he picked up the team and started the next year with the Philadelphia Athletics, and then managed them for 50 years. He's won more games than any other manager, even more than Tony La Russa, who's still winning them.
Connie Mack. Okay, how about Walter Johnson?
Now you're talking about one of my favorite players of all time. Walter Johnson came to the Washington Senators in about 1910, 1913, something like that, and he threw for 20 years or 18 years or something like that. The thing with Walter Johnson, he just had perfect form, and he was they said if they had radar guns at his prime, they might have clocked him at 100 miles an hour. He had very long arms, big Swede, and he just could throw the ball terrifically. Now, you know how much it cost for the Washington Senators to sign him? It was I think he was from Idaho or Montana, and they sent him a bus ticket for $9.
Okay. Good deal.
It worked out pretty well. And then he won a World Series, and I think in
1924
or 25. And that was just a great thing after a full career, because the Washington Senators never had very good teams. And so it was hard for him to get a winning record. I mean, he would win 20 games in the season. The team maybe only won 50. So it was hard for him. He didn't get much run support. And then finally the team got good enough, they put some other better players around him. And so he made it to the World Series, and then they won it.
You know, I did a lot of work on the Negro League teams in Cleveland from 1922 to 1950. I think that's a fascinating topic, and definitely worth going into, because these guys should be remembered for their achievements. So it's kind of frustrating about the lack of the lack of accurate statistics. Would you like to talk about Josh Gibson? Well,
Josh Gibson, of course, was one of the great players of the Negro Leagues. They had several. They say he was as good a hitter or even better than Babe Ruth. He had some prodigious home runs. Was a catcher. He was just lights out, throwing runners out at second base. And they said he would have done the same. I guess they played a lot of exhibition games against big league players. Would go on tour, postseason tours, and they would often play. So that's when Satchel Paige would pitch and do very well against the likes of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and the other ones that were touring. And they played with a tremendous passion. There were lots of players who came in that way, even late. Hank Aaron, he broke in from the Indianapolis Clowns, which was a player, a black team in the Negro Leagues in 1953. Ernie Banks came from Kansas City Monarchs. It was too bad, really, that Jim Crow got started, and that really kind of started. Even we just talked about Al Spalding. He was general manager of the Cubs, and his manager Camp Anson, who was very renowned as a player, but they were playing an exhibition game against the Toledo Mud Hens, and through Camp Anson, the players communicated that if the Mud Hens played an outfielder who was a black outfielder, now this is like mid-1880s, 1886 or so, that the Cubs wouldn't play the game. And the Toronto Mud Hens just capitulated and put in a white player in right field instead of the other fellow. And it was too bad. Then the other teams started to do the same thing, and discrimination in baseball started. It didn't used to be that way in the early days of baseball. There were blacks, Cubans, Indians. We talked a little bit about Sac Alexis, I think, the last time, who played for the Cleveland Indians. They named the Indians about him, because he was such a great player. When it came time to rename the team from the Spiders, they decided on, or actually the Naps, I should say, because Napoleon LaJoie. But he retired, so that's when you name a team after a player, that you've got a certain built-in destruct button on the other end. So stock Alexis was really well remembered, and so it has a I don't know, it has sort of a meaning to it, and but those are changes, and a rose by any other name would smell sweet.
The 1970s were the time of my youth, and when I was obsessed with baseball, the Baltimore Orioles were one of the best teams in the 70s. I remember them very, very well. And then as a historian, I went back when I was too young to really remember it, but the 1966 Orioles, I think, are one of the coolest teams because they come out of nowhere. They didn't even have a team for a long time, and then they win it, and they win it all, and shock L.A. And I love the photograph of Brooks Robinson jumping. He looks like he's way up in the air after they won the final out, and one of my favorite players of all time, Brooks Robinson. Would you like to talk about the human vacuum cleaner, probably the greatest defensive third baseman of all time, Brooks Robinson?
Right. I was fortunate enough to be able to see him play. I really probably should have put him in the book as one of the players that we talked about. We took players kind of at random, and Brooks Robinson was, like you say, a vacuum cleaner at third. He was so good at third. You couldn't get a ball down the line. If it was something that was hit short, he could come in and barehand it. He could make every play perfectly at third, and had great range and a strong throwing arm, although he didn't look like he was that big a guy. But, boy, he could play and was always doing the right thing at the right time, and he clutch hitter, too.
Yeah, they had some cool baseball cards from the 1970 World Series where that's when he made these plays going into foul ground and making the throw, getting the guys. And a good guy. See, that's the thing. There's winning in sports, but winning in life. And he was not only more important. He was a good, just a really good guy. And to me, that's why I have such a strong, regard for him.
Well, right. That's why it was fun for me to pick when we started out with baseball's winning ways. Part of it was we thought about baseball cards, and then we said, well, let's do a little. And on the back of each baseball card would be a little player description. So we said, well, let's do our own, only a little more expanded player description. So we put about 75 people in. There's a couple of them that are my favorites. One of the things was I thought of, my two statistics I think of the most, really, for hitting. The ones I want to hear the most are really only just two. It's runs scored and RBI, because that's what the game is about, scoring runs. So you got to get on base to score a lot of runs, and if you're a good player, you'll score a lot of runs, even though you'd have to depend on the other players to drive you in. But then you get your chance to drive in the other players on the team. So you combine those two numbers, and whoever leads that category, in my mind, really has a good shot at being the most valuable player in the league. So I thought to myself, well, who was the major league leader all time in runs scored? Either one of you guys want to take a guess at that?
Is it Rickey Henderson?
Is. So I looked up Rickey Henderson, and he always had a dirty uniform. He said one of his quotes was, if my uniform wasn't dirty, I didn't think I played in the game. He played for several teams. He put up amazing statistics, stolen bases, but he ended up being, and he played for a long time. Played for several teams, but you think of him with the A's and Oakland A's. So one story. And another story I thought was kind of interesting and surprised me. Now, the book itself is really intended to be read as, not only you and I can read it and those that are listening here, but if you have any younger listeners, 15, I got a letter from a ninth grade teacher, and she said she had the book on her desk and had a book report due, and one of the students said, can I read the book on your desk? It looks kind of interesting, Baseball's Winning Ways. Well, that's what I would hope. It doesn't matter what they read, whether it's Harry Potter or baseball, just read. And so the teacher wrote me and said, not only did the student read the book, which is, they actually read the book, it did the book report, because it was interesting. the book, he gave the book a great report, so a 15-year-old could read it and enjoy it. But he said, and how rare it is that you can find a book that can be read by a 15-year-old and his father and his grandfather too.
That's the thing, and I saw you had current players that would be more appealing to young people who are kids now, and so obviously that's who they're seeing play.
That's why,
unlike us old guys who are still living in the past.
well, it was nice to shuffle them all together, and I said to the publisher, let's put them in alphabetical order. Of course, so then you always start out with Henry Aaron, but it made a nice. They kind of skipped from Wee Willie Keeler playing in the 1890s and to modern players, Christian Yelich and others. But one of the more interesting ones to me was I said, well, I want to talk about my second son's favorite player was Ken Griffey Jr. And so I did a little research on him, and what I came up with was, I think, a great story for an adolescent reader, and that is, it was something that I had never known. But if you can imagine, he graduates from high school. He's the consensus number one pick in the draft. His father is a Major League Baseball player. I mean, he went to Moeller High School in Cincinnati. Great athletes through there, and he's the best. He's also a good football player and basketball player. Baseball is number one consensus pick. So he gets his $1.5 million, which I think was in 1985, which was pretty good. And then he goes into the minor leagues. Well, he doesn't do too well. And when you think about it, young man, he's only known success. If I'm the coach, I might think I'm not going to be too soft on him because that's not going to be good for him. And so not only was the minor league coach tough on him, everything he did, it was criticized. The other coaches did too. And it was very hard on him, and he didn't respond to that too well and didn't have a good season. So he went to the Arizona Instructional League and did okay there, and he came back at Thanksgiving at home in Cincinnati. And what did he find at home? His mother and his father, but his father being a former Major League Baseball player, but his mother too, were like, what's wrong with you? You only hit 240. You should be hitting 320. And you didn't only hit 5 home runs, and you should have had 15 or 25 home runs. What's wrong? And so he went from the kettle to the fire. It was even worse. And over the holidays, he got depressed, which can happen. And if it hadn't been for his girlfriend's mother, who got wind of it, he had taken over, I think the count was like 369 aspirins from a bottle, enough to do the job, was the report. And somehow he got whisked to the hospital. They pumped his stomach and saved his life. So I thought that was, it's even tough on the tremendous talented players. And I think they all learned a lesson from that. Of course, we went on to a Hall of Fame career, 600 and some odd home runs. But then in the book, I said, listen, if he had been successful, no Hall of Fame, no 100, 800, 670 home runs, no 10 Golden Gloves, no Hall of Fame.
And he almost died of suicide.
Right.
Wow, that's incredible. What a story.
So that's in the book, too.
Right.
I think it's a powerful lesson.
Absolutely. We shouldn't be so hard on each other.
Well, it's more fun to talk about Cool Papa Bell from the Negro Leagues. I have a little story there. A fellow gave me a book. It was 2 fellows that played in the Negro Leagues. One particularly described himself as from Arkansas, I think, Meridian, Arkansas, or something like that. And he said, I had a great high school senior season, like early 1950s, and through shutouts and so on. And I was really hoping that I would get drafted by a major league club. But when the draft day came, nobody called. He said, I was crestfallen and loping around the house for a couple of days, and all of a sudden the phone rang, and it was from the manager of the Chicago American Giants. It was like a Thursday, if you can imagine it. And the manager said, well, we're having a practice on Monday in Chicago. If you can be there at 10 o'clock at this field, I'll give you a look-see. Well, the fellow was so excited, he went to his mother, borrowed $20, got enough for the bus fare, made his way to Chicago, and by golly, he found that field, and at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, he was there. And the coach liked him, and he made the team. And but that burning desire.
And who was that?
I can't think of the fellow's name right now, and he was not a star or any, like Cool Papa Bell was so fast. Satchel Paige said, he said I roomed with him when he's so fast that when he turned the light switch off, he'd be in bed before it got dark.
Our guest has been Mr. JD Thorne, author of the current book, Baseball's Winning Ways. We're out of time, JD. Do you have any final words for our audience?
Well, I'd like to see if you like baseball, I think you'll like this very pleasant read of a book. We talk about different baseball players, and we talk about the origins of baseball. We didn't even touch on that. Who saw the first baseball game? You probably have to say the Sphinx, because baseball itself came from rounders, which is an English game, came from a Dutch game, which had its antecedents in ancient Egypt. So the Sphinx was probably the first one who saw a baseball game. In fact, Al Spalding did a European tour, and there's a famous picture, 1885, of his team sprawled all over the Sphinx when they played in Egypt. So I'll get the book. It's a great read, and for $20, it's available on Amazon, or you can get it through the publisher, which is Sporting Chance Press. But it was fun to write, and it's fun to read, and it's fun to talk to you guys, too.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Mr. J.D. Thorne. Next week, our guest will be Jerry Dupree, who created a basketball game and also had a fine playing career himself. Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Mr. J.D. Thorne.
Thank you.
Okay, very good.